and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to do the first part of my April wrap-up. Before we begin, I want to quickly note about the fact that I have just kind of disappeared for a month and some change. I basically, with everything going on in the world and my work being an essential job, I kind of just had a problem with trying to do that and my mental health and finishing school, because I finished and completed my degree while everything was going on, and it was a lot on me and I just couldn't handle it. And I am better now, and I do plan on being more consistent with posting, but as I said in my update earlier in this year, if I need to take a break, I'm going to take a break, and Twitter is the best place to figure out if I'm doing that, which is again always linked in the description. And with that being said, I read 41 things in the month of April, and this is the first part. The second part will include everything I read during the Dewey's 24-hour readathon, which again I always participate in, but the reason I didn't vlog it this time like I planned to was due to the fact that I basically was vlogging it and it just felt like you could see my mental health not being fully there, and I didn't want to put something like that on the internet because, well, you could see how I was feeling in it, and it just wasn't something I wanted out there. Despite being kind of as open as I want to be on this platform, I just didn't want something where you could clearly see me not wanting to be there on the camera, if that makes sense. With that being said, I read 41 things in the month of April, which amounted to 10,107 pages with an average of a 3.34, which is definitely due to part 2, so you should stick around to that. With that being said, let's get started. The very first thing I ended up reading in the month of April was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. My partner and I were in the middle of reading the series I was rereading. He was reading it for the first time. This is obviously following Katniss and Peeta as they are now victors from the first Hunger Games and seeing where their story takes them. And I don't want to obviously say too much more because this is the second book in the series, but also saying you guys kind of know what this is. I stand by my little review that I had where this ending is bananas, and I loved it just as much this time around. It does spend a lot more time outside of the arena than I was expecting just like last time, and I therefore gave this one a 4 stars. But this series is wonderful and it was a wonderful reread, and my partner ended up giving this book 5 stars, and I'm glad I got to revisit this series with him, and we ended up watching the movies as we were reading them, and he basically was like, this is a cycle, I'm just gonna want to keep reading them and watching them and reading them and watching them. Next, I read A Memory Called Empire. This is an adult science fiction debut from 2019 and snagged quite a few nominations for the BookTube SFF Awards, which I was trying to participate in, but things happened. And I definitely see why it did end up snagging quite a few nominations, and it involves aliens, which is something I'm learning that I do enjoy in science fiction. This is about an ambassador who is far from home. Her predecessor has been murdered and her connection to home has gone dark, and that is all you really need to know to go into this one. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I ended up having to drop the audiobook, which was strange for me because I normally listen to audiobooks along science fiction and nonfiction as a way to make the material more digestible, and this one was one of the ones where it felt like it was going in the opposite direction and becoming harder to understand, which was very strange, and I ended up having to drop it, and once I did, it made it a lot clearer. This book is also more tell than show, which ended up working for me, but I know won't work for a lot of people. Overall, I ended up giving this book 4 stars, and I do look forward to continuing on this in this series, which is very strange for me because it is a sci-fi series. So I'm glad I did end up picking this one up despite it being, you know, a sci-fi book. Next, I read A Marriage of Unconvenience, which, by the way, this was also the month with the owls, which explains why I read 41 books. I read A Marriage of Unconvenience by Chelsea M. Cameron. This was a book that was kind of a little bit of a mess. It is about 2 women who ended up getting married because the one needed to marry someone in order to get her inheritance, and I ended up giving this book 3 stars, and it is a very generous 3 stars in my opinion because the writing is not there for this one, and it feels like it needed a lot more editing, and it felt kind of choppy in like the story structure, and I don't know how else to say that except for it just felt choppy to me. I overall gave this one 3 stars. I've read better Chelsea M. Cameron books in the past. Next, I read The Near Witch by Victoria Schwab. This was Victoria Schwab's debut novel that ended up going out of print and has now since been re-released. The Near Witch, who is an old wives' tale kind of told to frighten children, but is she actually in the woods? And it's kind of the story of that. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I've noticed that with Victoria Schwab's writing that sometimes when a book is a bit slower paced, I end up having troubles becoming emotionally attached to the characters. I still ended up giving this one 4 stars because I did enjoy the world that was crafted and the fact of there being a witch involved, because I do love witchy things. But overall, I was kind of emotionally stunted with the characters as a result of the slower pacing. Next, I read Sal and Gabby Break the Universe by Carlos Hernandez, which I gave 4 stars. This is the first book in the Sal and Gabby series by Carlos Hernandez, and it is a Rick Riordan Presents books. This is the book that I was reading for the BookTube SFF Awards, and it is quite charming, to be honest. I have been reading a lot of the Rick Riordan Presents line because I've really want to obviously get more into mythology books, and I've been enjoying quite a few of them. However, this one is just purely fun, I guess is the best way to describe it. I've read quite a few of them that have been more heavier on the topic matter, but this one is just designed to be fun and whimsical, and it was just a good time. I gave it 4 stars because it took me a little bit in the beginning to like get who these characters were, especially Gabby, because she was like a kid lawyer and like I loved her immediately. But Sal, I was just kind of like, what is your motives? And it was a good time. I really highly enjoyed this one. Next, I read Harry Potter, A History of Magic, which was put out by the British Library. It's basically a collection of like artifacts that they connect to like magic, and I never know how to describe this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. This book basically got 4 stars for me because, dumb reason, but I feel like it would have been better for me to have read it like ebook or physically with the pictures that they're describing, and I listened to it on audio, and like I got the gist of what they were describing, especially with like really good details. However, I felt like I missed out on some of the magic, haha, with it just being an audiobook. Next, I read possibly my favorite book of the entire month and one of my favorite books of the year so far, and that is Ghost Squad by Clarabella Ortega. And this is about 2 girls who are trying to save like this girl's family tree, and it's basically be prepared, respect the dead, and always have a cat. And I give this book 5 stars, and it is friendship and magic and ghosts, and it just was the perfect middle grade storm for me. And like everyone has a favorite character. It is either like one of the 2 main girls, the grandma, the cat. You will have a favorite character, and it's so heartwarming, and it's like a really short middle grade, and it's so much fun, and I can't wait to reread it. I might reread it with my partner because like this might be something he would enjoy for a middle grade. I'm really looking forward to rereading this soon. Next, I read The Beloveds, which was an ARC I received through NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. I have quite a few that I had marked as not going to review, which were basically, I didn't think I was going to get to them before they released quite a few years ago when I wasn't actually actively reviewing as well as I am today, or I just didn't feel like finishing them, and I didn't mark things as DNFs, and I've decided to try to finish them all. And that being said, this was the one that sparked that off, and I ended up finishing this one. This book is pitched as a contemporary kind of Rebecca retelling, and I honestly didn't see that. This book is more about the sisters and their drama that they have between each other and the psychological thriller aspects involved in sister drama, and I honestly was not a big fan of that. If it had been more along the lines of like the Rebecca-esque twists and turns, I probably would have ended up enjoying the story more, but as it stands, I was not a big fan, and I ended up giving this book 1 star. Next, I ended up reading The Shell Collector by Anthony Doerr. This was a short story collection, and I originally thought it was about nature. It had been on my Kindle TBR forever. It was actually one of the oldest books on my Kindle TBR, so yay for getting things off of our TBRs. This is actually about humanity and how it interacts with nature, and I ended up giving this one 2 stars, not because I wasn't expecting what it was about, but more so because I didn't connect with the author's writing style and as it related to this topic. If I had connected to the author's writing style a little bit more, I probably would have been able to enjoy how he thought about humanity as it relates to nature, but as it stood, I just kind of didn't get it, and I felt kind of dumb as the topic went. so I didn't enjoy it, so I ended up giving it 2 stars. Next, I ended up reading American Heiress, the wild saga of the kidnapping, crimes, and trial of Patty Hearst. If you haven't heard the story about Patty Hearst, I definitely recommend looking it up instead of like listening to like me trying to explain it, because it's way more fascinating than what I'm gonna say. But basically, Patty Hearst was a woman who was kidnapped and ended up joining kind of the leftist group that she was kidnapped by in order to survive, and it has to do with like brainwashing and was she really like involved in this group. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It did not feel as unbiased as it should have. It felt more like the author was trying to tell a story than to try to tell the unbiased truth, and you could definitely tell how the author felt about certain things going on in Patty Hearst's life and in the story that he was weaving. And the more I think about this one, the less I like it. So I don't see myself keeping this one as a 3 forever. It might eventually drop down to like a 2. So as of right now, this one's a 3, but the longer it sits with me, the more likely it becomes a 2. So there's that. Next, I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune. This is an e-arc that I received through NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. It is a narrative about empire, storytelling, and the anger of women. I honestly don't know how to explain this book better than the little blurb that I just gave you. It is a very short novella, and I have started to kind of come to appreciate short novellas more as I'm like growing as a person, if that makes sense. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I intended to give it 5, but I didn't love the world building in the beginning because it did confuse me a bit, but I'm tempted to give it 5 stars because the writing style really was for me once I got used to it. But like, I'm leaving it at a 4 for now, but this is another thing that I do see myself, if I ever do reread it, potentially changing my rating. And since it is the beginning of like a standalone series, I might reread it before continuing on in this world. So it's a possibility that this rating could eventually change. Next, I read To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I still don't know how to describe this one except for that it is astronauts trying to survive in hostile environments outside of Earth. I feel like it was too short and ended too soon, and I still 100% don't understand what was going on in it, and I ended up giving it 3 stars as a result. It's a novella, so I don't want to say too much more than what I've already said. Next, my partner and I ended up reading Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This is obviously the last book in the Hunger Games trilogy when it was still a trilogy and doesn't have a prequel book now, but this was the original last book in the Hunger Games series. We ended up both giving this book 5 stars and cried. I still love how this series ends. I feel like it wraps up lovely. Am I still bitter about things that happen in this book? Absolutely. Do I think this book would have done well without some of these things? Probably not as well as I would hope. I love this book. I am hoping at some point to get my partner on camera with me to discuss this series, especially since we've read the other one that I haven't talked about in a wrap up, but spoilers for May. It's gonna be a good time to talk about these. But we both gave this one 5 stars. Next, I read The Nameless Queen, which I received an e-arc of through NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. This was a 2020 debut YA fantasy, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. I want to give this book props for being a like standalone YA fantasy, because a lot of books would have drawn something out to end up making this book to be a duology or a trilogy, and this book accomplished everything it needed to in just the single book, and it was a wonderful standalone in that regard. However, I felt like this book could have used a little oomph to make it just a little bit more unique. I felt like this book had a lot going for it, but it still ended up falling into some predictable tropes in order to it not go outside the box enough, which ended up bringing my reading down, and it could have been a little bit longer in order to make it kind of more unique in that regard. That being said, I definitely see this as being a good founding stone for this author's career, and she definitely has a writing style that I do enjoy, and I would definitely pick up something from her again because I do see a potential for growth for this author. So I definitely recommend checking this one out if you're interested in something kind of new, and definitely if you're interested in a YA standalone. Next, I read The Silence of Bones by Jin He. This is another debut from 2020, and it is a historical Korean kind kind of thriller, and it was a wonderful story. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It's surprisingly violent for being a YA release. It is a very gripping story and has like just the right amount of thriller aspects. I ended up taking this one down a little bit because of the thriller aspects and it being like a YA, and I have like very specific expectations for YA thrillers at this point because I've read so many of them. But that being said, this one did have a lot of new things that it brought to the table, and I was very pleasantly surprised by it. So if you're interested in this title at all, I definitely recommend checking it out. I forgot to say that this one is about a girl who is kind of an orphan and now has to help the police solve a murder of a wealthy woman and again, it's set in Korea in the 1800s. It was a very fascinating time, and I'm glad I definitely got to read an arc of this one. Next, I read Book Love by Debbie Tung. This is a short graphic novel talking about bookworms, and it was cute. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It's a little repetitive in its nature, which overall it brought down my enjoyment. When I read graphic novel collections, I kind of want to feel something. Obviously, as a bookworm, I did enjoy it for the bookworm aspects, but after a while, I just felt like it was too long for what I was getting out of it. But if you're a bookworm and you just want, you know, the bookworm nostalgia, I definitely would recommend checking this one out and flipping through it. But it was overall just kind of okay, and I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Snug, a collection of comics about dating your best friend. I actually follow this artist on Instagram, and so I was familiar with a couple of works that are in this collection. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. Somehow these comics are able to be relatable while also telling a story of like Snapchats within their life, and this is a perfect idea of kind of what I want out of something that's clearly told in a different medium but also in this medium, and it's a good collection in my opinion because it definitely shows what the artist is trying to say, because there's a way to take something that's partly on like Instagram and publicly posted but also bound to a physical format or an e-format, like how I read it from the library, and published, and it still has a cohesive format, and it was really nice to read it. And the last thing I want to talk about in this part of my wrap up is War and Peas, funny comics for dirty lovers. I actually check out this comic on Instagram as well, so I was interested in seeing if some of their storylines were kind of lined up in this collection, and unfortunately that wasn't the case, so I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Like I said, I was hoping that it was more organized because a lot of their comics have like a storyline that it would be nice if they had been like a little bit lined up, or by like the characters or like the theme, but overall it was okay. Some of them were funnier than others, but overall it was okay. If you're a fan of this comic or like this comic art style, I recommend checking it out, but overall it's just okay. Okay, so that is the first half of everything that I read in April. The second half obviously will include everything I read during Dewey's and, well, everything else I read. I apparently have been just kind of mood reading, and I did end up completing everything on my April TBR in Forms for Owls, so I got that going for me. What about you? I know April was a while ago, but what did you end up reading in the month of April? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like what you saw here today, be sure to like and subscribe. I, again, normally post videos on Wednesdays. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day!